The hospital room went quiet the moment my brother said it. "Stop milking this," Ryan muttered, standing at the edge of my bed like I was some kind of embarrassment instead of his sister. The steady beep of the heart monitor beside me was the only thing that sounded real, because nothing else in that moment made sense. Not the way my mom avoided looking at me. Not the way my dad stood there silent like he always did when Ryan spoke. And definitely not the way Ryan looked at me, like I was lying. Like I was wasting everyone's time. I had been in that hospital bed for 3 days. 3 days of tests, scans, and doctors trying to figure out why my chest kept tightening and why my heart kept skipping beats. But to Ryan, this was just another attention stunt. He always thought I exaggerated things. Ever since we were kids, I was the dramatic one, and he was the one who was always right, always louder, always believed. First headaches, then fainting, now heart problems. He scoffed, shaking his head. "You really expect us to believe this?" I didn't respond. I had learned something over the years. Defending yourself doesn't change someone who has already decided you're wrong. But silence makes them uncomfortable. Ryan stepped closer, annoyed that I wasn't reacting. "Say something," he snapped. "Or are you too weak for that too?" I slowly turned my head and looked at him, really looked at him. Same expression he had my entire life, superiority mixed with certainty. I exhaled softly. "Ryan." "I'm not faking this," I said quietly, and he laughed, actually laughed, like it was the most ridiculous thing he had ever heard. And that's when everything shifted, because in that moment I realized something. This wasn't just doubt anymore, this was complete disbelief. He didn't think I might be wrong, he was sure I was lying, and the worst part was, everyone else in the room was letting him believe that. "Yeah." "Then prove it," Ryan snapped. And before I could even process what he meant, his hand shot forward and grabbed the IV line connected to my arm. And in one sudden violent motion, he ripped it out. The pain hit instantly, sharp and burning as I gasped and grabbed my arm while blood started soaking into the white hospital sheet. The heart monitor beside me went completely erratic, beeping louder and faster. "Ryan, what are you doing?" My mom screamed, but he didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even look shocked. "If she's actually sick, this shouldn't matter, right?" he said coldly, like he had just proven something. I couldn't breathe properly, not because of the pain, but because of the shock, because of the realization that he really believed I was faking everything. The nurse rushed in seconds later, eyes wide as she saw the IV ripped out and the monitor going unstable. "What happened?" she shouted while pressing gauze against my arm. "He pulled it out," I managed to say weakly, but Ryan just scoffed. "Oh, please, she probably did it herself." And that was the moment everything inside me went completely still. Not anger, not fear, just silence, because I understood something very clearly. Nothing I said would matter anymore. He had already decided who I was. But then the room started filling with doctors, voices getting more urgent. "Cardiac instability. Call cardiology. We need immediate review." And suddenly the energy shifted. This wasn't drama anymore. This wasn't something that could be brushed off. This was serious. Footsteps approached quickly and the door opened as a cardiologist walked in, calm, focused, and in control. He looked at the monitor first, then at me, then at my arm, and finally at Ryan. "What happened here?" he asked. Ryan straightened, slightly trying to regain control. "She's faking it," he said. "I just exposed it." There was a brief silence, the kind that feels heavy, and then the doctor spoke. "No," he said calmly. "She's not faking anything." The room went completely still. "These readings indicate a serious cardiac condition that has likely been developing for weeks," he continued, "and pulling out that IV line could have triggered a life-threatening event." The word life-threatening hung in the air as my mom covered her mouth and my dad slowly sat down. But Ryan didn't say anything. Because for the first time in his life, he had nothing left to say. Everything he believed, everything he said, everything he did, had just been exposed in a single moment. And he wasn't the one who proved anything. He was the one who got proven wrong. Yeah. Then prove it, Ryan snapped. And before I could even process what he meant, his hand shot forward and grabbed the IV line connected to my arm. And in one sudden violent motion, he ripped it out. The pain hit instantly, sharp and burning as I gasped and grabbed my arm while blood started soaking into the white hospital sheet. The heart monitor beside me went completely erratic, beeping louder and faster. "Ryan, what are you doing?" My mom screamed, but he didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even look shocked. "If she's actually sick, this shouldn't matter, right?" he said coldly, like he had just proven something. I couldn't breathe properly, not because of the pain, but because of the shock, because of the realization that he really believed I was faking everything. The nurse rushed in seconds later, eyes wide as she saw the IV ripped out and the monitor going unstable. "What happened?" she shouted while pressing gauze against my arm. "He pulled it out," I managed to say weakly, but Ryan just scoffed. "Oh, please, she probably did it herself." And that was the moment everything inside me went completely still. Not anger, not fear, just silence, because I understood something very clearly. Nothing I said would matter anymore. He had already decided who I was. But then the room started filling with doctors, voices getting more urgent. "Cardiac instability. Call cardiology. We need immediate review." And suddenly the energy shifted. This wasn't drama anymore. This wasn't something that could be brushed off. This was serious. Footsteps approached quickly and the door opened as a cardiologist walked in, calm, focused, and in control. He looked at the monitor first, then at me, then at my arm, and finally at Ryan. "What happened here?" he asked. Ryan straightened, slightly trying to regain control. "She's faking it," he said. "I just exposed it." There was a brief silence, the kind that feels heavy, and then the doctor spoke. "No," he said calmly. "She's not faking anything." The room went completely still. "These readings indicate a serious cardiac condition that has likely been developing for weeks," he continued, "and pulling out that IV line could have triggered a life-threatening event." The word life-threatening hung in the air as my mom covered her mouth, and my dad slowly sat down. But Ryan didn't say anything, because for the first time in his life, he had nothing left to say. Everything he believed, everything he said, everything he did, had just been exposed in a single moment, and he wasn't the one who proved anything. He was the one who got proven wrong. Ryan finally broke the silence, but his voice wasn't the same. It wasn't loud or confident like before. It was quieter, uncertain. "This doesn't make sense," he said, almost to himself, like he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. "She's been doing this for years," he added, looking around like someone would agree with him, but no one did, because no one could, not anymore. The evidence was literally right in front of them. The machines didn't care about opinions. The doctors didn't care about family history, and the situation had moved far beyond his control. The cardiologist turned slightly toward him, not angry, not aggressive, just direct. "How long has she been experiencing symptoms?" he asked, and Ryan hesitated, because for the first time he didn't have an answer ready. My mom spoke instead, her voice shaky. "A few weeks. Maybe longer," and the doctor nodded slowly. "That aligns with what we're seeing," he said, then added something that made the entire room go completely still. "If this had gone untreated much longer, it could have resulted in severe complications, possibly even cardiac failure." The words didn't just land. They hit hard, like something breaking apart inside the room. My dad leaned forward slightly, his face pale now. My mom covered her mouth again, But Ryan didn't move at all. He just stood there frozen, because in that exact moment, everything flipped. Every time he had dismissed me, every time he had mocked me, every time he had said I was overreacting, it all came back at once. And he couldn't push it away anymore, because now there was proof, not emotional proof, not personal explanation, but medical proof. The kind you can't argue with, the kind that doesn't change based on how loud you speak. And for the first time in his life, Ryan wasn't in control of the narrative anymore. I slowly turned my head toward him, not out of anger, not out of frustration, but because I wanted to see it. I wanted to see the moment he realized what he had done. And it was there, clear as anything. The confidence gone, replaced with something heavier, something closer to regret but not fully there yet, more like shock mixed with realization, like his mind was trying to catch up to what had just happened. "I didn't know," he finally said, his voice low. Almost like he didn't want anyone else to hear it, and I believed him, not because it excused anything, but because it didn't matter whether he knew or not. The damage was already done. The truth had already come out, and everything he believed about me had already been proven wrong. I didn't raise my voice, didn't argue, didn't list out all the times he had dismissed me, because I didn't need to. Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's clarity, and I just looked at him and said, "I know." And somehow that hit harder than anything else could have, because it wasn't anger, it wasn't blame. It was acceptance that he had never really seen me, never really listened, never really tried to understand. And now it was too late to undo that. The doctors continued working around me, discussing next steps, treatment plans, monitoring procedures, everything real, everything structured, everything serious, and Ryan just stood there, not speaking, not interrupting, not correcting anyone, because he couldn't, because the moment he pulled that IV line, he thought he was exposing a lie, but instead he exposed something else entirely, his own certainty, his own assumptions, his own need to always be right, and now all of it was gone. The cardiologist gave final instructions before stepping back, his tone still calm but firm. "She'll need close monitoring, further testing, and immediate care," he said, then paused briefly before adding, "And no more interruptions." His eyes flicked toward Ryan for just a second, not dramatic, not confrontational, but enough to make it clear that what had happened wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous. And Ryan lowered his gaze slightly, something I had never seen before, not in years. Not ever, because he was always the one who looked down on others, never the one being corrected, never the one being put in his place. But now the dynamic had changed, completely and permanently. My mom moved closer to me, gently placing her hand near mine, careful not to disturb the IV, her touch softer than it had been all day, like she was realizing something too, something she had ignored before. My dad finally spoke, his voice quiet. "We didn't know," he said, and again. I didn't respond, because that sentence didn't fix anything. It didn't erase what had happened. It didn't undo the words, the accusations, the moment Ryan decided I was lying without even trying to understand. And yet, something had shifted, not just in the room, but in how they saw me, because for the first time, I wasn't the dramatic one. I wasn't the one overreacting. I wasn't the one needing to explain myself. I was the one who had been right all along. And they were just now catching up to it. Ryan took a step back, then another, like he didn't belong in that space anymore, like he didn't know where to stand now that everything he believed had been shattered. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, maybe defend himself, maybe apologize, maybe explain, but nothing came out, because there are moments when words don't work anymore, moments when the truth is too clear to argue against, and this was one of those moments. I closed my eyes for a second, not because I was tired, but because I finally felt something I hadn't felt in days, certainty. Not about what would happen next, not about the diagnosis or the treatment, but about something much simpler. I wasn't wrong. I never was. And sometimes that's the only victory you get, not loud, not dramatic, not something you celebrate, just quiet, undeniable truth, the kind that doesn't need to be proven anymore because it's already there. And as the machines continued their steady rhythm and the doctors prepared the next steps, I realized something else too. Ryan didn't expose anything that day. He didn't reveal a lie or prove a point. He just forced the truth to come out faster than it would have on its own. And in doing that, he didn't prove I was fake. He proved exactly who he was. No one spoke for a while after that, not because there was nothing to say, but because for the first time, everyone in that room understood that whatever they said next would actually matter. The kind of silence that settles after truth is different. It's heavier, more real. It doesn't leave space for denial or distraction. My mom slowly moved closer to the bed, her steps careful, hesitant. Like she wasn't sure if she even had the right to come near me after everything that had just happened. Her hand hovered near mine for a moment before gently resting beside it, not holding it, just there, like she was trying to reconnect with something she had ignored before. My dad stood a little further back, his posture slightly bent, his expression distant, like he was replaying everything in his mind. Every word Ryan had said, every moment he had stayed silent. Every time he chose not to step in, because sometimes the realization doesn't come from what you did. It comes from what you didn't do. And that realization can be even heavier. Ryan, on the other hand, hadn't moved much since stepping back. His body was still there, but his presence felt different, like he had lost something invisible, something that had always defined him, the certainty, the control, the belief that he was always right. He looked around the room once, quickly, like he was searching for something familiar, something that would confirm his version of reality. But there was nothing, no agreement, no validation, no one backing him up anymore, and that's when it really hit him. Not when the doctor spoke, not when the monitor reacted, but right now in the silence, when he realized he was alone in what he believed, completely alone. And there's something about that moment, when you go from being the loudest voice in the room to having no voice at all. That changes you instantly, permanently, because there's nowhere left to hide, no argument left to make, no way to shift the situation back in your favor. And I could see it happening in real time, the shift, the collapse of everything he thought he knew. And I didn't need to say anything to make it happen. I didn't need to remind him of what he did. The truth was already doing that for me. The cardiologist returned a few minutes later with more results, his expression still calm but more focused now, like he had all the pieces and was simply confirming what he already suspected. He explained things in a steady tone, something about irregular heart function, early signs of a developing condition that required immediate attention. Nothing overly dramatic in his delivery, but the seriousness was there, clear and unavoidable. "We caught this at a critical time," he said, looking directly at my parents. "If this had gone unnoticed for longer, the complications could have been severe." He didn't need to say more than that. The implication was obvious, and it settled into the room slowly, like something sinking in deeper with every passing second. My mom nodded repeatedly, almost too quickly, like she was trying to absorb everything at once. My dad asked a few quiet questions, practical ones about treatment and recovery, but his voice lacked its usual steadiness. Like he was still processing something else entirely, something beyond the medical explanation, something personal, something about how they had all gotten this so wrong, and Ryan. Ryan didn't ask anything, didn't interrupt, didn't challenge. He just stood there listening, which in itself felt unfamiliar, almost unnatural, because he had never been the one to listen. He had always been the one to speak, to decide, to conclude. But now he had no conclusions left, no control over the narrative, and the more the doctor spoke, the clearer it became that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a minor issue blown out of proportion. This was real. It had always been real. And the only thing that had been wrong all along was the way it was seen, the way it was dismissed, the way it was reduced to something it was never meant to be. And in that moment, the truth didn't feel loud or dramatic. It felt quiet, steady, undeniable, like something that had always been there waiting to be recognized. When the doctor finally stepped out again, leaving the room in a softer kind of silence, the kind that comes after everything has already been said, Ryan shifted slightly, like he was about to speak, then stopped, then tried again. But the words still didn't come, because what do you say when everything you believed has just been proven wrong? What do you say when your actions can't be undone, when your certainty turns into doubt in front of everyone? He looked at me briefly, not the way he had before. Not with judgment or frustration, but with something else, something uncertain, something closer to recognition, like he was seeing me for the first time without the assumptions he had always carried. And that moment, that small shift in the way he looked at me, said more than anything he could have spoken, because it showed that something inside him had changed, not completely, not perfectly, but enough to break the version of me he had always believed in, and I held his gaze for a second before looking away. Not out of weakness, not out of avoidance, but because I didn't need anything from him anymore. Not an apology, not an explanation, not even acknowledgement, because the truth had already done what it needed to do. It had shown everything clearly, without argument, without force, without needing me to defend it. And that's something most people don't understand. Real truth doesn't fight to be believed. It just waits, patiently, until there's no way left to deny it. And when that moment comes, it doesn't need help. It doesn't need support. It stands on its own and changes everything around it. Later, when the room had settled and the tension had softened into something quieter, something more reflective, I found myself thinking about everything that had led to this moment, not just the hospital, not just the diagnosis, but all the small moments before it, the times I had been dismissed, the times I had been told I was overreacting, the times I had questioned myself because it was easier than arguing, and I realized something that felt strangely calm instead of painful. None of that defined me, none of those assumptions, none of those judgments, none of those voices that tried to reduce what I was experiencing into something smaller, something easier to ignore, because in the end, reality doesn't bend to opinions. It doesn't adjust to make people comfortable. It stays exactly what it is, and sooner or later it shows itself, whether people are ready for it or not. Ryan stood near the door now, not leaving, not staying fully, just there. Caught between what he used to believe and what he now knew, and maybe one day he would understand it fully. Maybe one day he would look back at this moment and realize exactly what it meant. But that wasn't something I needed to wait for, because my part in this was already done. I didn't need to prove anything anymore, didn't need to explain, didn't need to fight to be understood. The truth had already spoken, and it had said everything that needed to be said. And as I lay there listening to the steady rhythm of the monitor returning to normal, I understood something in the simplest way possible. I hadn't been wrong, not then, not now, not ever. And sometimes, that quiet certainty is the strongest thing you can walk away with. The next few hours didn't feel real. They moved in that strange, stretched way where time passes but nothing feels connected. Nurses came in and out. Machines were adjusted. More tests were scheduled. But everything around me felt quieter now, not physically quieter, but emotionally like the storm had already passed, and what remained was just the aftermath. My mom stayed close to me the entire time, not saying much, just occasionally asking if I needed anything. Her voice softer than I had heard in a long time, like she was choosing every word carefully now, like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing again. My dad stepped out a couple of times to speak with the doctors, asking questions I couldn't fully hear. But I could tell from the way he spoke that something inside him had shifted too. There was less certainty in his tone, less assumption, more listening, more hesitation. Like he was finally realizing that understanding something requires more than just deciding what you believe. And Ryan stayed near the door almost the entire time, not leaving, not fully stepping in either, just standing there like he wasn't sure where he belonged anymore. And every now and then I could feel his eyes on me, not in the same way as before, not sharp, not critical, just uncertain, like he was trying to process something that didn't fit into the version of reality he had always lived in. And that kind of shift isn't easy. It doesn't happen instantly. It's uncomfortable. It forces you to question things you've never questioned before. And I could see that discomfort in the way he moved, in the way he avoided speaking, in the way he looked at the floor more than at anyone else. Because for the first time, he wasn't the one leading the situation. He wasn't the one deciding what was true. He was just another person in the room, watching something unfold that he couldn't control. And I realized something in that moment that felt surprisingly calm instead of emotional. I didn't need him to understand immediately. I didn't need him to apologize right away, because the truth had already done its job. It had broken through everything he believed, and now it was just a matter of time before that understanding settled in completely. The doctors returned later with more detailed explanations, talking about treatment plans, medications, follow-up care, all the practical things that come after the realization, and I listened carefully, asking a few questions when I needed to. Because now my focus had shifted too, away from proving anything, away from being believed, toward something much simpler, taking care of what was actually happening. And as I did that, I noticed something else, something small but important. No one interrupted me anymore. No one dismissed what I said. No one questioned whether I was exaggerating or misunderstanding. They listened, fully, completely, like my words finally carried the weight they always should have. And that change, that quiet shift in how I was seen, felt more significant than anything else that had happened that day. Because it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was just real, and real things don't need to announce themselves to matter. They just exist. Steady and undeniable, like the truth that had been there all along, waiting to be recognized. By the time evening started settling in, the light in the room had softened, the harsh brightness of the day fading into something calmer, something that made everything feel more still, more reflective. And that's when Ryan finally moved, not dramatically, not suddenly, just slowly, taking a few steps closer to the bed like he had been thinking about it for a long time and had only now decided to act. He stopped a short distance away, not too close, not too far. Like he was unsure of how much space he was allowed to take now, and for a moment he didn't say anything, just stood there, looking at me in a way that felt different from every other time before, like he was seeing more than just his own assumptions, like he was actually trying to understand. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than I had ever heard it, not weak, but stripped of everything that used to make it sharp. I thought. He started, then stopped, like the sentence didn't make sense anymore, like whatever he had thought didn't matter now that he knew the truth. And that pause, that unfinished sentence, said more than anything he could have explained, because it showed that something inside him had shifted enough to break his certainty, enough to make him question himself. And that's not an easy thing for anyone, especially someone who has spent their whole life believing they're always right, I watched him for a second, not expecting anything, not waiting for a full apology or a perfect explanation, just observing, because sometimes the most important moments aren't the ones where everything is said clearly. They're the ones where change begins quietly, where someone realizes something they can't ignore anymore. And he nodded slightly, almost to himself, like he was accepting something he hadn't wanted to before, then stepped back again, not running away, not leaving, just giving space, and that small action. That simple choice to step back instead of stepping forward with more words, more arguments, more certainty, felt more meaningful than anything else he could have done. Because it showed restraint, it showed awareness, it showed that for the first time, he understood that this wasn't about him proving anything. It was about him finally seeing something clearly. And as I lay there, listening to the steady rhythm of the monitor, feeling the quiet stability returning to my body, I realized something that stayed with me long after that day ended. The truth doesn't just change situations. It changes people, not all at once, not perfectly, but enough to create a shift, enough to break patterns, enough to open a space where something different can begin. And whether that change continues or fades, whether it grows or disappears, isn't something you can control. It's something each person has to choose for themselves. But what matters is that the moment happened, that the truth was seen, that it was no longer hidden behind assumptions or ignored because it was inconvenient, and that in itself, quiet and steady, was enough. That night felt longer than any night I could remember, not because the hospital was loud, or because the machines kept pulling me back into awareness, but because once the truth comes out, your mind doesn't stop replaying every moment that led to it, every warning sign, every ignored symptom, every family dinner where Ryan rolled his eyes when I said I felt tired. Every phone call where my mother told me stress can make people imagine things. Every quiet moment where I questioned myself because the people around me seemed so sure I was fine. And that was the part that hurt in a way the IV never could. Because pain in the body is simple. You can point to it, treat it, measure it. But the pain of being doubted by the people who should know you best sits somewhere deeper, somewhere words don't reach easily. And as the room darkened and my parents took turns stepping outside, I stared at the ceiling and realized I had spent years making myself smaller just to avoid being called dramatic. I had softened my words, hidden my fear, laughed off symptoms, apologized for needing help, and all because I had learned that in my family, being sick wasn't met with concern first. It was met with suspicion. Ryan had taught everyone to see me through his version of me. And for too long, I had let that version stand unchallenged, not because it was true, but because fighting it was exhausting. But now everything was different. Now there was a chart, a diagnosis, a cardiologist, a room full of witnesses. And suddenly the same people who had questioned every word from my mouth were treating every beep from a machine like undeniable truth. And I didn't hate them for that, not exactly. But I understood something clearly in that moment. Some people will ignore your voice until something louder says the same thing for you. And when that happens, they don't get credit for finally listening. They only get the responsibility of realizing how long they refused to.